Hello everyone, this is Mrs. G's Storytime, and we are reading Treasures of the Snow by Patricia Santon with permission of Moody Publishing Company, and we are on the last chapter, 26, A New Start. Just as the weeks passed in the valley, so the weeks passed in the mountains. The snow began to melt and the little streams became torrents, and the first crocuses pushed up in the fields along the river. The cattle and the goats shut up in the stables began to stomp restlessly and cry for freedom. Spring was coming to the mountains. Grandmother was busy with the spring cleaning, and Papa was busy with the new calves. This was a good thing, for when they were busy they did not miss the children quite so badly. Grandmother, who was really much too old and blind to be spring cleaning, would often sit down suddenly and imagine she had heard the hop and the clatter of one boot and one crutch climbing the steps, and the cheerful sound of a little boy singing out of tune. How they missed the children. Lucien missed them too. He lived further up the mountain than any other child, and he never walked home alone without wishing Annette was walking beside him. But he was not lonely or unhappy at school any longer. He had proven to them that he was sorry for what he had done by his brave journey across the mountain, and they had accepted him back as one of themselves. And Lucien himself was different. Ever since that night he had asked Jesus to come into his heart, he had known that there must be a difference. The old bad temper and laziness and unhappiness could not stay for long in a heart that was open to the love of Jesus. Gradually, Lucien began to find that as long as he kept close to Jesus by praying and reading his Bible every day, the love was stronger than the bad temper and the laziness, and that he was growing into a nicer sort of boy. Often when school was over, he would go across to Grandmother's chalet and help with the spring cleaning. They were great friends now, and indeed Grandmother would hardly have known what to do without him, for he chopped her wood and did her shopping and brought letters up from the village. This he liked best of all, for they were usually from Annette, and Grandmother always got him to read them aloud to her. There was sometimes a picture of Danny, too, and Grandmother kept them all safely in front of her Bible and often spread them out on the table to look at them. By the end of February, she had quite a collection called Me in Bed, Me Chasing Goats, Me Having Medicine, Me and My Nurse, Me and Annette, Me and Snowball Kitten. Grandmother thought they were all so lovely, of course. Another sadness came into Lucien's life. His friend, the old woodcarver, was going to leave the mountain to go and live down by the lake with his son, Monsieur Javert, and his family. It had all been arranged that afternoon when they first recognized each other. He was to leave at the beginning of March, and the day before he went, Lucien climbed up through the forest to help him pack. He had given away the goat, the cat, and the hens, and sold nearly all of his figures. But he was not selling the house. He was just shutting it up to wait until he came back. I shall often come back, Lucien, he explained. I couldn't leave the mountain for long. I'll stop down there for a while, but then I shall hear the mountains calling me, and back I'll come for a bit of a holiday. He looked thoughtfully across the valley and then glanced around the bare shelves of the hut. I'm taking a few of my figures for the children, he remarked. They may like them. One, Lucien, I kept for you. I came across it when I was sorting through them the other night. It's the one I thought I couldn't part with, but I'd like you to have it, if you'd like it. Lucien looked up eagerly. I'd love to have one, monsieur, he replied. It will remind me of you, and besides, I might be able to copy it. The old man went to the cupboard and took out the gift he had laid aside for Lucien. He put it in the boy's hands and watched him closely as he examined it. It looked simple enough at first sight. It was a wooden cross made of 2 pieces of rough wood, but the crossbeam was fixed to the post by beautiful carved ropes, twisted in knots. Lucien's fingers touched the perfect carving gently, and he lifted shining eyes to his old master. It's beautiful, he cried. I can't think how you carved those ropes without breaking the wood. And then he added rather shyly, It's the cross where Jesus was crucified, isn't it? Yes, replied the old man simply. I carved it the night my master died, the night he spoke to me about the love and the mercy of God, and the night I believed I could be forgiven. Once you and I had a talk about loving. The cross is the place where we see love made perfect. Lucian looked up again quickly. Perfect love, he repeated. And that's what it says in Grandmother's verse. It keeps coming. It's what Annette and I talked about the night before she went away. Yes, agreed the old man. You'll often hear it. Perfect love. It means love that goes on doing until there isn't any more to be done. And that goes on suffering until it can't suffer anymore. That's why, when Jesus hung on the cross, he said, "It is finished." There wasn't one sin left that couldn't be forgiven, not one sinner that couldn't be saved, because he had died. He had loved perfectly. The old man seemed to have forgotten Lucian and to be talking to himself, but Lucian was listening all the same. He said goodbye to his old friend and promised to come up early next morning and carry his pack to the station on the way to school. And then he ran home. He was in a hurry because he wanted to write Annette so that the old man could take a letter with him next morning. But the first thing to do was to hang his little cross carefully above his bed. And then he ran out to the kitchen to find a pen and a paper. The kitchen was rather a mess. His mother was over with the cows and had not had time to wash the pans or empty the buckets. Lucian usually helped her, but tonight he was in a hurry. If he slipped back into his bedroom, he could write without being disturbed, and she would clear the mess and not know he'd come in. He hurried off and curled himself up on the floor by his bed. He was just starting to write when he happened to glance up and caught sight of the carved cross hanging on the wall. He stared at it for a moment or two, thinking hard. What was it the old man had said? Perfect love goes on doing until there isn't anything more to be done. He, in some small way, wanted to be just like Jesus and to love perfectly too. And there were all those dirty pans out in the kitchen waiting to be washed. He went rather pink and got up slowly. And when his mother came in, and half an hour later, she found the kitchen all clean and tidy, and a happy-hearted Lucian writing at the table. He went up to the old man early next morning when the forest was still dark, and they came down together, leaving the lonely hut, waiting for his return. The old man went off on the train that had carried Annette and Danny, and his eyes fixed sadly on the mountains. When the narcissi began to come out, "I shall come back," he reminded Lucian as the train was starting off. "You write and tell me when they're out in the valley, and that will give me plenty of time to get back before they flower in the mountain. Don't forget, Lucian." It was not very long after that Lucian collected a letter from Grandmother from the post office and hurried up the hill to give it to her, for he knew it was from Annette. He clattered up the veranda steps, shouting the good news, and Grandmother came eagerly out. "Read it to me, Lucian," she said, and sat down at the sunshine, folding her hands and shutting her eyes so she could concentrate on the words. It's a very short letter, and Lucian read it all in one breath. "Dear Papa and Grandmother," it said, "Danny and I are coming home the day after tomorrow. Danny is quite well again. We are longing to see you, and Danny says please bring Claus to the station. Your loving Annette." There was also a note from Madame Givette giving the exact time of their arrival, and a picture from Danny called "Me Coming Home in the Train." In just a few minutes, Grandmother began to cry, the shaky little voice of a very weak old woman, but she quickly wiped away her tears and pretended to become a very strong old woman because there was such a lot to be done. "Go over to the shed and give that letter to Monsieur Banet, Lucien," she said firmly, "and then come back here and help me right away. There's a lot to be done. Beds to air, cakes to cook, and the furniture to be rubbed up. We must have everything looking its best for the children." Papa, on hearing the news, said, "Oh," and he scratched his head. Then, for the first time in his life, he upset that milk pail, and shortly afterwards disappeared into the forest and didn't come back for a long time. The next day dawned clear and beautiful. There was no school, and Lucien was up at daybreak picking flowers. He arranged them in the bowl on the veranda table and then set out for the station, walking slowly because there was plenty of time and plenty to think about. Grandmother and Papa and Claus had gone in the mule cart. It was such a lovely, spring morning, and not unlike the day just over a year ago when Danny had fallen, thought Lucian. What a dark day that had been. The memory of it spoiled his happy thoughts. It had been all his fault that they had ever had to go away, and perhaps, after all, they wouldn't be very pleased to see him. Annette had said Danny was well, but Lucian could hardly believe it. He reached the station feeling very nervous and stood away from the others, with his hands in his pockets, because he suddenly felt a little afraid of meeting them, and wished he hadn't come. Papa kept his eyes fixed on the far point down the valley where the train will appear between the mountains, and Grandmother struggled with Claus, who seemed to want to set off down the line and meet the train on her own. "It's coming!" cried Papa, and Lucy had suddenly felt shyer than ever. When it came, Annette and Danny were at the window, rosy with excitement and longing to get out. Danny gave one glance at the well-loved faces that had come to welcome him, and in that glance he noticed Lucian standing apart. For an instant he wondered why. His loving, happy little heart wanted to gather everyone together about him, and he jumped off the train and ran straight to Lucian. "Look, Lucian," he shouted, "I can walk. The doctor you found made me better, and I have run just as though I never fell over that ravine. Look, Grandmother, look, Papa, I'm running without my crutches. And look, Claus, here's your kitten. Isn't he big, Grandmother? Nearly as big as Claus." Claus and the little kitten simply hated each other, and they snarled and scratched and swore dreadfully. Nanny and Grandmother struggled to keep them apart, but everyone laughed. And the train rattled off, and Annette clung to her father as though she would never let him go again. Only Lucian turned away because he felt there were tears in his eyes. He had been honored above everybody. The wrong he had done had been forgiven and forgotten forever. Danny could walk. Danny could walk as if he had never fallen. Spring had come. The winter was over and gone, and the flowers appearing, and the birds singing again. Joy had returned to their hearts. And that's the end of Treasures of the Snow. Isn't that a precious story? I love it. I love you. Well, we'll be starting tomorrow a new book by Patricia St. John, but I'm going to wait till tomorrow to let you know what that book is going to be. I love you. I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.